What if I told you one single envelope could destroy Hollywood's most powerful names? A Thai cafe in Los Angeles, a mysterious stranger, and photographs that could topple careers, expose government secrets, and reignite a scandal buried for over a decade. But the question is, who can be trusted when everyone has something to hide? If you want to hear how this dangerous game unfolds, stay with me till the very end. And if you love intense, real-feel thrillers like this, hit subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your idea might just be our next story. The cameras never stopped flashing that night, even though the smiles on the red carpet had started to crack. The air smelled of perfume, sweat, and quiet desperation, the kind you can only find at a Hollywood premiere when the stakes are higher than anyone dares admit. Everyone knew this was supposed to be the comeback, the film that would erase the scandals, the lawsuits, the whispers of ruined careers. But beneath the champagne toast and scripted laughter, there was a silence so sharp it could cut. They called it the biggest Hollywood disaster ever before it even hit the screens. And now new hit pieces were already brewing in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Some said it wasn't just about a bad film. It was about secrets buried so deep they could drag an entire industry into the dirt. One of those secrets had traveled halfway around the world before finding its way to Los Angeles. It began in a quiet Thai cafe tucked between two glass towers in downtown L.A., a place where the smell of jasmine rice mixed with the faint notes of lemongrass tea. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Molly, had a past she never discussed. But on that rainy Tuesday, she recognized a man who walked in, the same man whose face had been plastered across tabloid covers decades earlier, always standing just behind the stars. His hair was grayer now, his eyes sharper, as if each year had filed him down to a weapon. He ordered in Thai, and her hands froze mid-pour. The last time she had heard that dialect was in Bangkok, on a night when fire lit up the Chao Phraya River and the sound of gunshots echoed through the alleys. She never thought she'd see him again, not here, not in the very city that had built his fortune on dreams and destroyed them just as fast. Outside, a black SUV idled at the curb. Inside, he leaned closer, sliding an envelope across the counter. Inside it, grainy photographs, time-stamped unmistakable. They showed one of Hollywood's biggest names, the very face of the comeback film, in a meeting that could not be explained away. Molly's voice trembled as she asked him why he was giving these to her. He only smiled, a cold, practiced smile, and told her, "Because you know what to do with them." Then he walked out into the drizzle, leaving the envelope in her hands and a storm gathering in her chest. She glanced at the photos again, her breath catching as she recognized another face in the frame. It wasn't just the actor. It was someone even more untouchable. Someone who could make entire stories disappear from every news outlet in America with a single phone call. The rain began to pound against the windows, blurring the neon lights outside. In that moment, Molly knew she was holding something that could ignite the next wave of hit pieces, or end her life before the week was over. She locked the cafe door, flipped the sign to close, and pulled the curtains shut. Her hands shook as she spread the photos across the small wooden table, each one a piece of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. The faces stared back at her, frozen mid-conversation, mid-smile, but the setting told another story. It was a private Thai cultural gala in Los Angeles, an event that had never been covered by the press. The silk banners in the background bore the emblem of a royal family crest, the kind rarely seen outside Thailand. And seated just 2 chairs away from the actor was a U.S. senator whose name was whispered in Hollywood like a warning. The senator's hand rested lightly on the actor's shoulder in one photo, his lips close to the actor's ear. In another, the two leaned over a document stamped with a seal Molly didn't recognize, but she knew enough to understand it wasn't meant for the public. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "You have something that doesn't belong to you." She froze, staring at the words, a chill crawling down her spine. Another message followed seconds later. "Don't make the same mistake twice." Twice. Her mind flashed back to Bangkok, the night she'd been forced to choose between her own safety and revealing the truth about a deal that had left bodies in its wake. She had run then, disappearing into the chaos, leaving her country and her name behind. A loud knock jolted her from her thoughts. Not a polite knock, heavy, deliberate, the kind that says we know you're inside. The rain outside masked the sound of footsteps shifting on the wet pavement. Through the thin crack of the curtain, she saw two men in dark suits standing by the door, their eyes scanning the street before landing squarely on her window. Molly's breath caught in her throat. The men didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with the stillness of people who had all night to wait. One of them raised a hand and tapped the glass twice, slow, deliberate, like a metronome counting down. She stepped back from the curtain, heart hammering so loud she thought they might hear it. Her mind raced through escape routes. The kitchen door led to a narrow alley, but it was probably watched. The back staircase went up to her apartment above the café, but that would only trap her higher. Another knock, harder this time. The wood groaned under the impact. She could see their silhouettes shifting now, one of them pulling something from inside his coat. Her phone buzzed again. A new text, * last chance. Hand it over, *. She looked at the envelope on the table. The photos now spread like a crime scene around it. Every instinct screamed at her to destroy them, but her fingers refused to move. The air in the cafe felt heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Somewhere outside, a police siren wailed and faded into the distance, swallowed by the rain. The tapping on the glass stopped. She dared to glance through the curtain. The two men were gone. Only the SUV remained, its headlights cutting through the downpour, engine idling like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, from the corner of the room, she heard the faint creak of a floorboard upstairs. Molly's eyes shot toward the ceiling. The sound had been soft, almost too quiet to notice, but it was there, the unmistakable weight of a footstep. Her apartment upstairs had only one entrance, and it was inside the cafe. She moved slowly, each breath shallow, straining to listen. Another creak followed, closer this time, as if whoever was up there was moving toward the top of the staircase. The smell of rain mixed with something faint but foreign, the sharp tang of cigarette smoke, the kind she hadn't smelled since Bangkok. Her gaze darted to the counter where she kept a small chef's knife. She slid it into her palm, the metal cold against her skin, her grip tightening as the sound above her stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. She took a step toward the stairs, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Halfway there, the cafe's front door rattled violently. Not a knock this time, but a forceful tug. The men outside were back. The lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied again, casting long shadows across the walls. She turned toward the stairs, every muscle in her body tense. From the darkness above, a voice spoke in Thai, low, calm, almost familiar. "Molly, you can't make the same mistake again, Molly." Her grip on the knife tightened until her knuckles went white. The voice wasn't threatening in tone, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen her run before and wasn't about to let it happen again. She swallowed hard, forcing her own voice to remain steady. "Who's there?" She called up the stairs, the English words sharp against the soft hum of rain outside. No answer, only the slow, deliberate sound of someone descending, one step at a time. Each creak of it would send a tremor through her chest. The front door rattled again, harder this time, followed by a deep male voice shouting, "Open the door, Miss Molly, and nobody gets hurt." The sound of rain against the windows masked part of the words, but not the cold certainty in them. Her eyes flicked between the staircase and the door. She was trapped in the middle, danger in front of her, danger behind. The envelope on the table seemed to burn in her peripheral vision. A shadow appeared on the stairs. Not one of the men from outside. This one wore a soaked leather jacket, dark hair dripping with rain, his face partially hidden until he reached the last step. Molly's breath hitched. She knew that face, not from Bangkok, but from every Hollywood gossip blog and late-night talk show for the past 2 years. He was a disgraced director of the very film being called the biggest disaster in Hollywood history. And in his hand, he was holding a second envelope. He stepped fully into the dim light, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pinned her in place. Water dripped from his jacket onto the cafe floor, each drop echoing in the silence between them. "You got something that belongs to me," he said, his voice low but urgent. Before she could answer, he tossed the envelope onto the table beside hers. The flap was already open, revealing photographs that mirrored hers. Same event, same faces. but from different angles. These, he said, nodding at the pictures, are only part of the story. Yours are the rest. His gaze flicked toward the door as the men outside pounded again, harder than before. They're not here for you, he continued. They're here for both of us. Molly's fingers hovered over her own envelope, her mind racing. Why me? She demanded, her voice cracking just slightly. The director gave a humorless smile. Because you were there the first time this happened, he said. Bangkok, 15 years ago. You just didn't know who you were saving. Her stomach turned, the rain suddenly sounding louder against the windows. She opened one of the new photographs and felt her breath leave her lungs. The younger version of herself stood in the background of the shot, serving drinks, looking directly into the camera. The pounding on the door stopped. A long pause, then the metallic click of a lock being worked from the outside. Molly's head snapped toward the door. That sound wasn't a knock or a kick. It was deliberate, controlled, like someone who already knew how to get inside. The director moved closer to her, his voice dropping to a whisper. We have seconds, he said. Once they're in, there's no talking our way out. Her pulse roared in her ears. Then what? She asked, clutching the knife tighter. He glanced toward the back of the café. There's a service hatch in the kitchen floor. Leads to the old delivery tunnels under the block. Do you still have the keys? Before she could answer, the door hinges groaned. The lock gave a sharp, final click. The rain outside seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of the door slowly swinging open. Two shadows stretched across the wet tiles, long and distorted by the light spilling in from the street. Neither man spoke as they stepped inside, shutting the door behind them with a quiet thud that was somehow worse than a slam. The taller one's gaze landed on the table, on the two envelopes. A slow, almost satisfied smile crept across his face. Molly took a step back, but the director's hand caught her wrist. Don't, he murmured. If you run now, they'll know you have the real ones. The shorter man reached into his coat and pulled out a black leather wallet. From it, he produced an ID badge government issue, the kind that didn't need an explanation. Then he spoke the first time. You're both coming with us. Molly's throat went dry. The badge caught the dim cafe light, its embossed seal glinting just enough to make her stomach twist. Federal, not police, not private security. The director didn't move, didn't blink. On what grounds? He asked, his voice steady but edged with something that told her he already knew the answer. The taller man took a slow step forward, his shoes leaving wet prints on the tile. In the interest of national security, he said evenly, we're taking possession of all materials related to this matter, and the two of you are material. Molly's grip tightened on the knife, but the director's hand on her wrist pressed down gently, signaling her to lower it. Instead, she glanced toward the envelopes. The shorter agent followed her gaze, then moved to the table. He picked up her photos first, flipping through them casually, as if they weren't the kind of images that could set off an international scandal. When he reached the last picture, he paused. His jaw tightened just enough for her to notice. Then, without a word, he slid it into his inside pocket instead of placing it back in the envelope. Molly's heart skipped. She knew exactly which photograph it was, the one with the senator, the actor, and the unmarked document. The taller agent turned toward them again. You can cooperate here or in the vehicle outside, he said, gesturing toward the door. The SUV's engine still rumbled faintly through the rain. The director glanced at her, his eyes calculating. Then, in a voice just low enough for her to hear, he said, If we get in that car, we're not coming back. Molly felt the weight of his words settle in her chest like a stone. The taller agent's hand drifted casually toward the weapon at his hip, not drawing it, just a reminder. The shorter one moved to the door, cracking it open to let in the smell of wet asphalt and engine fumes. Her mind raced. The tunnels. If she could just get to the kitchen, just lift the hatch. Now, the taller agent said, his tone no longer patient. The director stepped forward, placing himself slightly between her and them. We're not refusing, he said, his voice calm. But you need to understand, those photos aren't complete without the originals. And the originals aren't here. The taller agent's gaze sharpened. Where are they? The director didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his own envelope on the table, holding it loosely by the corner. "You'll get them when I'm sure we walk away from this alive." The shorter agent's free hand twitched. The faintest sign, he was ready to grab the envelope. And that's when the lights in the cafe flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the room into sudden darkness. For a split second, the only sound were the rain and the low hum of the SUV outside. Then came the crash, glass shattering at the back of the cafe. Molly's instincts took over. She yanked her wrist free from the director's grip and darted toward the kitchen, her shoes slipping on the wet tile. Behind her, she heard the agents shouting, their voices sharp and overlapping, followed by the metallic scrape of a chair tipping over. The smell of spilled coffee and rainwater filled the dark air as she reached the back counter. Her fingers found the metal ring bolted into the floor, the hatch. She pulled hard, the hinges groaning as if protesting against years of disuse. A beam of light from a flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping over the counter and catching her shoulder. "Stop," one of the agents barked. She didn't. The hatch came open with a dull clang, revealing a black void and the faint, damp smell of concrete and rust. The director appeared beside her in the darkness, his hand pushing her toward the opening. "In," he hissed. She hesitated for half a breath, then slid down into the cold, narrow tunnel, her hands scraping against the damp metal rungs. Above her, the sound of footsteps pounded closer. The director followed her down, his jacket brushing against her back as the hatch above slammed shut. But before it did, Molly caught one last image burned into her mind. The taller agent standing in the kitchen doorway, gun drawn, his flashlight beam locking onto the empty space where they had just been. The tunnel swallowed them in darkness, the only sound their uneven breaths echoing off the damp walls. Molly's palm slid against the cold, slimy metal as she climbed down the last rung, her feet hitting shallow water that soaked instantly into her shoes. The director landed beside her, the splash sending ripples down the narrow channel. "Move," he whispered, his voice bouncing low and urgent. She could barely see him, just a faint outline of his shoulders as he started forward. Somewhere above, muffled shouts bled through the floorboards. The agents were searching. Heavy boots thudded across the cafe, growing fainter, then louder again, as if they couldn't decide where their prey had gone. Molly's hand brushed against the tunnel wall, finding grooves, old carvings, unfamiliar symbols etched into the damp concrete. They felt almost Thai, but not quite. Her mind raced to remember where she'd seen them before, and then it hit her. The same symbols had been on the silk banners in the gala photos. A metallic clang echoed from behind them. It wasn't the hatch. It was something in the tunnel, farther back, like a gate being opened. The director froze. "They're not supposed to know about this entrance," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He turned to her, his face just barely visible in the gloom. "How many people did you tell?" "I didn't," she started, but stopped when she saw it, a dim, moving light reflecting in the water ahead of them. Someone was coming from the opposite direction. The light grew brighter, swaying with each step, until the silhouette holding it came into view. A single figure, tall, hooded, the beam of a small lantern cutting through the stale darkness. The water around their legs rippled outward, sending soft echoes down the tunnel. Molly instinctively stepped back, bumping into the director's chest. He didn't push her forward. He didn't move at all. His posture had shifted, though, his muscles tensing in a way that told her he recognized the figure. The hooded person stopped about 20 feet away. They lowered the lantern just enough to let its glow spill upward, revealing a woman's face, sharp, calm, and unmistakably Thai. Her eyes locked on Molly first, studying her like she was reading a page in a book she'd already memorized. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, almost formal. "Molly Shanarankle," she said, pronouncing the full name Molly hadn't heard in over a decade. "You've been running a long time." Molly's pulse hammered in her ears. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman's gaze shifted briefly to the director, then back to Molly. "I'm the one who can get you out of here," she said, "but only if you hand me the photographs." Before Molly could answer, the metallic clang echoed again, this time from the direction they'd come. The agents were in the tunnel. The woman's expression didn't change, but her grip on the lantern tightened. "They're moving fast," she said, her voice low but certain. "You have 30 seconds to decide." The director stepped forward, the shallow water rippling around his boots. "You can't trust her," he said to Molly, his tone sharper now. "She's not here to save you. She's here to make sure those photos never see daylight." The woman's eyes narrowed. "And you are? You've been feeding the same machine for years. The only difference is you finally ended up on the wrong side of it." Footsteps splashed behind them. Closer now, paired with a harsh beam of flashlight cutting through the tunnel's shadows. Molly's chest tightened. She could almost feel the net closing in. The woman extended her free hand toward Molly. "Give them to me," she said, the calm in her voice almost breaking. "I'll make sure they reach the people who can actually use them. You try to run with him." She jerked her chin at the director, "and you'll disappear before sunrise." The director moved closer to Molly, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "If you hand those over, you'll never know the truth about Bangkok." The footsteps behind them turned into splashes, the agent's voices now sharp and clear in the damp air. Molly looked from the woman's outstretched hand to the director's tense stare, the photographs clutched tight in her fist, the paper already damp from the tunnel's humid air. The woman took one step closer. "Now, Molly, choose." Molly's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The water around her legs felt colder, heavier, as if the tunnel itself was holding its breath. Behind her, the flashlight beams bounced along the wet walls, the agent's voices cutting sharper with every step. She looked at the woman's hand, steady despite the tension in the air, then at the director, whose eyes were locked on hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Her grip on the envelope tightened, the edges digging into her skin. The woman spoke again, her voice firmer now. 10 seconds. The director leaned closer, his whisper almost a plea. "You give them to her, you'll never get another chance to finish this." The agents were close enough now that she could hear the water slapping against their boots. One of them shouted, "Stop! Federal agents!" Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She could feel both of them, woman and director, waiting for her decision, both convinced they were right, both hiding truths she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. And then, from somewhere deep in the tunnel ahead, past the woman with the lantern, came the faint but distinct sound of another set of footsteps approaching fast. The woman with the lantern turned her head sharply toward the sound, her jaw tightening. The director's hand instinctively brushed the inside of his jacket, like he was reaching for something hidden. Molly stayed frozen between them, the envelope clutched so tightly her knuckles ached. The new footsteps splashed closer, their pace quick and deliberate, but not hurried, like whoever had no fear being caught in this narrow, dark space. The lantern's glow flickered against the tunnel walls, shadows stretching long and jagged. Then the figure emerged from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a soaked field coat and carrying nothing but a worn canvas satchel. His eyes swept over the scene, the agents closing in from behind. Molly caught between the woman and the director, and then landed squarely on her. "Molly," he said, his voice deep, steady, and carrying the faintest trace of the northern Thai accent she hadn't heard since childhood. "You're holding something that belongs to my family." The woman stiffened. The director muttered something under his breath, and the agent's shouts echoed louder, bouncing off the damp concrete. The man with the satchel stepped forward into the lantern's light, and Molly saw it. The same royal crest from the gala photograph stitched onto the fabric, faded but unmistakable. The sight of that crest sent a rush of heat through Molly's chest, even as the cold tunnel air clung to her skin. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a mark she had seen on sealed envelopes, on whispered documents passed in back rooms, on the silks draped behind the senator and actor in the photographs. It was a thing she had been running from, without fully understanding why. The man's gaze didn't leave hers. "That envelope is not just evidence," he said quietly, though his voice carried over the echoes of approaching boots. "It's a debt, one my family has been paying in blood for decades." The woman with the lantern shifted, the flame trembling in her grip. "You're too late," she said. "It's already bigger than you, bigger than her." The director took a half step toward Molly, his voice sharp now. "And if you get either of them, You'll never know how deep this goes. They'll bury it, and you with it. The agents were almost upon them, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the gloom, bouncing off wet walls. Molly could hear the clink of metal, weapons, maybe restraints, as the sound of their splashing steps grew louder. Her breath was coming faster, the damn paper in her hand sticking to her skin. 3 paths. 3 people who swore they knew the truth. 3 versions of a future she couldn't yet see. The man with the crest stepped closer, his hand outstretched, palm up. The woman's lantern cast her face in hard light, expectant. The director's eyes were locked on the envelope, almost daring her to make the wrong move. Molly's fingers loosened just slightly. The agents' voices were now clear, cutting through the tunnel like steel. And in that moment, with all 3 of them waiting, she knew whoever she handed it to would decide not just her fate, but the fate of something far larger, something she had only begun to understand. The tunnel seemed to shrink around her, the air heavy with damp and the weight of decisions that could not be undone. The water lapped gently at her shins, masking the tiny tremor in her legs as she looked from one face to the next. The man with the crest's hand stayed steady, his expression unreadable. The woman with the lantern's eyes were sharp, almost pleading now, though her voice remained calm. The director's jaw tightened, as if he could will her to see things his way. "Molly!" One of the agents barked from behind, their flashlight glare spilling over her shoulder. "We said don't move." Her heartbeat drummed in her ears, faster than the agent's splashing steps, faster than the soft hiss of the lantern flame. Somewhere deep inside her, memories stirred. The night by the Chow Fryer River, the smell of smoke and gunpowder, the moment she'd walked away without looking back. She'd told herself she had been running for her own survival, but maybe she'd been running from this moment all along. The paper edges of the envelope bit into her palm as she lifted it, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. The man with the crest took a single step closer. The woman shifted the lantern, its glow pooling over Molly's hands. The director's gaze burned into her, a silent warning. The agents were close enough now that their shadows merged with hers, their boots slapping water in hurried rhythm. Her breath slowed, each inhale deliberate, her decision tightening like a knot in her chest. She extended her hand, not fully, just enough for all 3 of them to lean in, the tension stretching thinner, the sound of the rain above a distant hum. And in that fragile, suspended second before contact, a sharp, deafening noise cracked through the tunnel air, a gunshot, its echo rolling endlessly against the concrete walls. The lantern wavered in the woman's grasp as the shot's echo faded, leaving only the ringing in Molly's ears and the frantic churn of water. For a moment, no one moved. They just stared at each other, caught between instinct and disbelief. The man with the crest staggered back, his expression tightening, one hand pressed against his side. The agents froze in the tunnel behind, their flashlights swinging wildly, searching for the shooter. But the shot hadn't come from them. Molly's eyes darted upward. A thin shaft of light bled through a vent in the tunnel ceiling, an access point to the street above. A shadow passed over it, and then it was gone. The man steadied himself, his breathing ragged but controlled. "You have to move," he said through clenched teeth. "Now." The woman with the lantern stepped forward, her free hand on Molly's shoulder. "This is your last chance. Choose." The director stayed back, watching her with something between urgency and resignation, as if he knew there was no version of this where everyone walked away. Molly looked at the envelope in her hand, its paper soft from the damp, the ink beginning to blur at the edges. She thought of Bangkok, of the faces and the photographs, of the way every path here had led her to this one point. Her decision came not in a rush, but in a calm clarity that surprised her. She tucked the envelope inside her jacket, pulling the zipper up to her chin. "I'm not giving this to any of you," she said, her voice steady. "Not until I know the whole truth, from all sides." For the first time, none of them spoke. They just watched her, as the water at her feet carried the ripples of that choice outward into the darkness. Above, the sound of sirens began to fade into the night, swallowed by the rain. And in the narrow tunnel, Molly turned toward the unknown, the lantern light behind her growing smaller with each step.